Hello and welcome. This is NTA Tuesday Live, and I'm Cyril Stober. And the Fourth Republic, under Nigeria's growing democracy, much can be said to have been achieved, but not without some twists and turns, often referred to as the beauty of democracy. Tonight, our program is in two folds. One is on the rumble across state houses of assembly, and the other is about young women in governance, amplifying the voices of the next generation. We'll start off with the young women in governance right after this report by Timothy Yusuf.
Young women in governance, amplifying the next generation's voices, using Nigeria as a case study in line with this year's International Women's Day, has proven that Nigeria's women are on the path of steady growth in their involvement in politics and governance.
We need to protect women's participation in the grand norm laws that we have in the country, for instance, in the Constitution and in other laws that protect women's participation. The opportunity for women, the freedom of women to participate as much as their male counterparts.
From Amina Aminu Dorei, a fellow of the Association of Practicing Professional Project Managers of Nigeria, to Aisha Usori, a 35-year-old lawyer and politician who ran for office in the 2019 elections. Ndikatu, a 32-year-old politician who was elected as a member of the Kaduna State House of Assembly in 2019. Current Deputy Governor of Kaduna State, Hadiza Balarebe, and her counterparts in Rivers, Akwa Ibom, and Adamawa states, among some serving ministers and other elective and appointive office holders, are among many women who are engaged in the art of governance across the country.
I believe women being part of decision-making, being part of the power play in this country, our country would really be a better nation.
Against the backdrop of the 2025 celebration of the International Women's Day, it's essential to highlight the progress and challenges faced by young women in governance in Nigeria. Cultural and social barriers, limited access to education and funding are some of the factors limiting women's ability.
It's a time for reflection, action, and solidarity. It's a day to acknowledge the incredible contributions that women make to our communities, economies, and societies at large.
Analysts recommend increased access to education and resources, addressing cultural and social barriers, and supporting women-friendly policies as factors that would amplify women's involvement in politics and governance.
We need to encourage women to register in their different wards to any party of their choice, but they have to be ready to be able to run. They don't have to wait till when elections start. That's why sometimes they have problems.
The celebration of International Women's Day 2025 provides another opportunity to recommit to empowering young women in governance and creating a more inclusive and equitable society for all. Timothy Yusuf.
All right, that report gets us started on our first discussion on young women in governance, amplifying the next generation's voices. Let's start by introducing our guests. Here with us tonight is Risola Abiola, Senior Special Assistant to the President on Citizenship and Leadership, Youth and Gender Advocate. Thanks for being with us here tonight.
Thank you so much for having me.
Right. We're also joined here in the studio by Samson Itodo, Executive Director, Yiaga Africa. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, always a delight.
Right. And joining us via Zoom is Honorable Rukayat Muturayo Shitu. She's Chairperson, House Committee on Information, Sports, Youth and Tourism of the Kwara State House of Assembly.
Good evening. Thank you very much for having me.
Right. Thanks for being with us tonight. Well, let's begin to look at the issues regarding young women in governance. Now, we'd like to start off looking at the contributions of women generally and zeroing in on young women. This from 1999 to date. What major impact would you say they've had in terms of governance?
So I would say that from 1999 to date, we've had quite a challenge with getting women adequately represented, especially through elective office. Despite that, especially if we look at the National Assembly and the low level of women's representation, despite that, we've actually been able to secure landmark legislation as a result of the efforts of some of the women who did get in. And an example is the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act. Looking at state assemblies as well, and I'm speaking firstly on elective office, we've also been able to have, landmark legislation like the Gender and Equal Opportunity Bill, supported in some cases. Some of these bills have been supported by, in some cases, first ladies in those particular states, because essentially when you're outnumbered, you have to use all the resources and all the people at your disposal. So very often you find first ladies getting involved, pushing for policies, having key government stakeholders take action on matters that directly affect women. On impact as well, we can talk about the fact that we have some women who have aspired and just shown the rest of us that it is possible to do so. We talk about Hajia Mama Taraba of blessed memory, may Allah forgive her. We talk about Senator Aisha Binani. We could talk about other women who have tried to aspire to the role of, the #1 citizen in their respective states, showing us that truly, if you have what it takes, you can actually come pretty close to clinching that highly coveted spot. And then we've also had women break barriers in states like mine in Ogun, where we've had several women serve as deputy governors. We've had female speakers. We've had a female speaker. I know we've had another one in yet another state. In Lagos, we've had female deputy governors as well. Female senators have been elected. In Anambra, at a point, we had 2 out of 3 senators from that state being women. So I would say that overall, the numbers, especially through the ballot, have not been very encouraging, but we have had some valiant women who have shown the rest of us that it is possible for as long as we keep pushing, right from when Madam Afegwa was first elected as senator in this country. So we've had so many, the Fumilayo and some Kutis who have, worked really hard to pave the way for other women in this generation. So there's quite a bit of work that still needs to be done. And then when we look at appointive positions, because again, there's more than one pathway to power. There's the elections, there's the appointive positions. With appointive positions, we see better inclusion or better representation for women, but again, it is also tied to the disposition of the men who hold the actual power. So if a governor is gender friendly, if a governor is progressive, you will find that he will appoint women into key positions. Take Kwara as an example, take Lagos as an example. We know certainly that there is no dearth of qualified women in other states as well, but we're perhaps not seeing the representation at the same levels because it's not something, I'm sorry to say, that they prioritize, so to speak. Right. At the federal level, we see lots of women appointees, including myself.
Still a far cry from what it should be, if you must admit that.
Yes, certainly. Okay. But then, as I said earlier, it is the disposition of the principal that essentially determines who gets included and at what levels. We've seen, yes, sir.
Well, Samson Toto, you could say progress, but it's that what can be said to be appreciable?
Well, when you say appreciable progress, I would say that we've seen in the last decade or so the role that women have played in the economy. We've seen the role that women have played in transforming the health sector. So when you think about the whole negotiation for the Paris relief gain, which Okonjo-Iweala did play a very pivotal role on getting us that relief. It attests to not just the leadership of a woman, but also the capacity that they have to transform any space that they are given. We talk about late Dora Akunyili today. If we remember her contribution, she's an icon, and we celebrate her because of the contributions that she made in sanitizing, the health sector as the DG of NAFDAC. Even as Minister of Information, how she was able to advance and promote, good people from a great nation, or the fact that she was able to instill certain values. And up until she left, she was one patriotic Nigerian. I have not seen any public leader who is a man, who is as patriotic, very vocal, both in conduct and in action, like the likes of the Dora Akunyili. So, to a large extent, we've made some progress, but it is quite limited progress, and the reasons are not far-fetched. There's the fact that you probably have a legal environment that does not recognize that women should have a seat at the table. You have a dominant political culture that doesn't push voters to punish political parties that don't field women as candidates. And so because voters are not voting women in large numbers, political parties, don't present women, because political parties feel, actually in most cases, that women are not electable. And that if you put a man and a woman on the ballot, the man or the male candidate is more likely to actually secure the vote. And what that tells you something about the sociology of the voters. And this is why it is important to continue to, enlighten citizens to appreciate the essence of women's leadership. Now, it isn't just about fulfilling a democratic ideal. And when we have these conversations and we think, oh yeah, it's just for the purposes of inclusion, yes, that's important. But it's not just about inclusion. It's inclusion for what? It's inclusion to put food on the tables of people. It's inclusion to solve some of the leadership challenges that we have. And the women who have been given the opportunity, or women who have taken the opportunity, or women who have, broken the ceiling,
wrestled the opportunity.
In all cases, they've succeeded compared to how men have performed in office.
All right, we'll return to some of the things you've just said now, particularly the question of political parties thinking that women are unelectable. But let's go back to Honorable Rukayat Muturayo Shitu. What do you make of the current situation? Since 1999 till date, how would you assess the, if steady, if slow somewhat, march of women into governance and appointive positions?
Actually, when we look at from the year 1999 to this present moment, well, there have been a significant impact from women who have been in different positions. One of them is the current First Lady of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Senator Oluremi Tinubu, and we'll have the likes of Amina Mohammed, who happens to be the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations. We have the likes of Abike Dabiri. So these people, in one way or the other, have occupied a position, and some are currently occupying some certain position. And we've seen some of their activities, what they have done, and how they have impacted society. And talking as an elected officer here in Kwara State, I can say very well that women hold the larger percentage when it comes to the electoral processes, because women, the volume of women participating in the voting system during the election, even while we are still less represented in the political space. So this is something that is worthy of emulation. So in this regard, I believe with the capacity, with the activities of every woman that we've mentioned here, the likes of Senator Oluremi, even including me here in Kwara State, there are so many things that we've done here. So I think there is much more that we are looking at, while still there have been a significant impact from women across the board since 1999 to this present moment. Well, we are still agitating for more spaces. Here in Kwara State, we have legislation backing the 35% affirmative action, backing that there should be a certain percentage for women in the governance here in Kwara. And I believe there are some states also in Nigeria here that have already signed that bill. So this boils down to the fact that if women are in the position, they will definitely utilize the position well.
All right. Thank you very much. We'll return to you in just a moment, but we'll take a short message at this point.
Discussion is going on about elective and appointive positions in the ongoing constitutional reforms. Are you wondering what this is about?
It is very simple. Gender quota is a policy that ensures a fair representation of both men and women in leadership and governance spaces.
It is designed to create a more balanced and inclusive environment by setting a minimum threshold for either gender, recognizing that both men and women bring valuable perspectives to decision making.
For example, this is in place in Rwanda, where women make up 61% of the parliament, and in Namibia, where women make up 46.2%.
In Nigeria, without a gender quota, women in parliament are 4.7%.
With a gender quota,
we can change this narrative.
Join the movement.
All right, let's continue with this conversation. Well, if we are agreed that women generally are not given the opportunity and they hardly ever get into those positions, how much so for young women? We've seen a few of them now pushing the barriers.
So at a point, a few years back, I would always say that young women are in a precarious situation because there's the double jeopardy from being female and also being young, because that was at the point when we were still working really hard for young people to be considered as, valuable stakeholders in the political process. Again, I would want to make reference to the federal level, not just because I work for the president, but based on what I have seen. I would say that recently, since this new administration, you'll find a lot of young people, young women especially, either heading agencies, serving as advisors, and it's really good that the president is showing leadership in that regard, because a major challenge that we've always had as young women is when we get into these spaces, it's like when a group of people have been advocating for a very long time, for several decades, and then you are coming as a new entrant into that space. It is very clogged. It's like there's a very long queue of people who are waiting to occupy these positions. And then for those in the younger generation, we always felt as though our voices didn't really matter, and that our own exclusion didn't matter as much as that of the older women. And in the youth sector, we would find that young men often took precedence over us as young women as well. So it's been very heartening that we have a president who recognizes that and is willing to platform and empower young women. However, the narrative is not the same, especially when you look at subnational levels, which again takes us back to that argument of how we still have to rely largely on the benevolence of who wins an election, perhaps as a governor, and then decide if you want to have equitable representation in putting a team together. And very often, young women are left out of this equation. So there's still quite a lot of work that we need to do. Those of us who are perhaps within the system, do what we can in terms of mentorship. We have a lot of women's groups now. I'm a founding member of the APC, and I recall that when we started, I started as PRO of one of the party's major youth groups. Whenever we had general party activities, you could really very easily count the number of young women in each of those gatherings. But we're now at a point where there are dozens of young women's groups specifically, because we really made it a point to target young women's mobilization specifically, and then to also advocate for young women's inclusion at an adequate level.
Even in the general space, it used to be extremely tough to get young people generally, even male young people into positions. Are these cultural factors, or they're just things that, because it's basically the kind of society we run?
I think it's just a multitude of factors responsible for this. Yeah, they are cultural, some are religious in nature, some are sociological, there are even economic factors that contribute to this. I think there are four things. First, whilst I agree to an extent with Rinsola that you have a president who perhaps, in her opinion, is more gender friendly, I don't think he's demonstrated that so well in his actions. You can't have a cabinet of over 40 ministers. And how many women are appointed as ministers? And some of them are about, I think they are not more than 9, right? And so why don't we have 30% of ministers women? Because if you want to demonstrate that you are committed to women representation, then your cabinet should not be dominated by men. When you say, yes, special advisors, yeah, quite important. But But we need to see more women in that decision-making table. Yes, maybe compared to other presidents, whether he's done better, but we need to see that. Secondly, the National Assembly is considering the reserve seats bill. It's over 1 year, 5 months since the constitutional review process commenced. Till date, the president has not made his position known with regards to women's representation in the National Assembly. And so what we would want to see is, given that the executive and the legislature enjoy very good relationship, we want to see the president, engage with the National Assembly and say, this bill is a priority legislation.
So you've just
Let's
got to
ensure
pass it
we
as
pass
quickly
this.
as possible.
Speak to the governors, right? He had iftar with them yesterday, right? Speak to them and say, this bill is a priority bill because we need to address this question of women representation once and for all. And he's got the opportunity to do that. So yes, I don't think that, in some of the actions that he has taken, he's demonstrated that indeed he wants to be, a strong promoter of women inclusion in politics. Honorable Rukayat, who sits in Kwara, she was and still is the youngest female legislator. She ran when she was 26 in 2023, and she ran and won her elections. But if you hear her experience, it wasn't just that she was given the space. We celebrate her because of her resilience, because of her determination. And this is the kind of leadership that she has shown, the kind of resilience that these young women have shown. They are men who cannot even do 1/4 of what they have done. And this is why we have to constantly create the opportunities to celebrate these women, because we're not celebrating them because we want to change or ensure that we balance for better. No, we lose more as a society if these competent women who have character, who have capacity, are not in decision-making table. We lose more. And that's the point that needs to be made.
So straight away, Honorable Rukayat Shitu, give us a little bit about your experiences. I've been so young at the time you ran. What were the obstacles? Did people look at you and say, who is this young person who thinks they can come in and rock the boat? Give us a little bit of your experiences.
Well, I ran at the age of 26, as earlier said by Mr. Sampson. And at that time, it is very, very hectic, and I must say it is something very, very challenging. And one thing is, I have always focused and well determined that we are doing it, we are taking the risks. I won the election. Even before the election, there have been a tussle and hustle between me and the other candidate, why we are going from one court to another. And at the end of the day, even still after election, this even continue. So this is to tell that it is not easy for you to take any position. We have to give it everything that we have, our power, our capacity. We have to act that we are actually passionate about this. So the thing was very, very hectic. Like I said, we were from one court to the other, and eventually at the end of the day, we got it. This is to show that I am determined and I'm not focused that I am going for this, and nothing is actually pulling me back on this.
When I hear stories like this, I say, people around, do they scoff at you and say, oh, look at this upstart, you think we've been in this for ages? You think you can just come and skip to the front of the line? You hear comments like that?
Yes, certainly. Well, I would say that it takes a great deal of determination to decide as a young woman that politics is what you want to do. So to a very large extent, you kind of already have to be a bit stubborn to insist on it. So it kind of goes without saying that comments like that won't affect you. However, I would want to clarify a few things based on comments that Samson made. I don't think at any point I said that perhaps we're at 35% inclusion with appointments. My point was specifically about the level of young women's representation and the fact that those that have been included, we have quite a number of heading agencies. They're not in inconsequential positions. So as somebody coming from a background of advocacy myself, I understand the importance of acknowledging progress when the needle is moving, even if you might not be at the point that you want to be just yet. And then regarding the gender bills, there is the principle of separation of powers. The tax reform bills, for instance, for example, that the 4 bills are like from the executive. Those are executive bills. Advocates do a lot of stakeholder engagement. They can write. There's a Minister for Women Affairs who is very progressive, very well seasoned as well. There's an essay on gender matters as well. They can write. The Chief of Staff is also very gender responsive. So these are people within government that they can always approach. And if they're seeking an audience with Mr. President, they can go through, these channels.
That might well be so, but what Samson is saying, let the president just come out and say, look, this is what I think, and that would carry more weight, wouldn't it?
Why should the president wait to be approached? This matter, the salience of this is public knowledge, right? There are women who have canvassed this, right? And so if the president, in his renewed hope agenda, talks about inclusion and women representation, it's a commitment that he has made. And so no one needs to knock on the president's doors, right? It is clear that the issue of exclusion, let's look at what's happening in the National Assembly and the way Senator Natasha is being treated today. That is the experience that women go through in politics. And what is happening is just a reminder of how chauvinistic we are as a society. And when a woman, is treated the way she is treated as a legislator, I think that it calls for concern. Those kinds of actions disincentivize women from participating in the political process. And this is where we expect that, for instance, like the president, you have a reserved seats bill. Let's not even talk about the other gender bills. But there's an opportunity here. And I think the president and the National Assembly need to sit down and say, this advocacy for women representation has been a long-standing advocacy. We do have an opportunity, a historic moment. Go ahead, pass this legislation in the interest of our democracy, in the interest of inclusion, but more importantly, in the interest of the future. And that's what we want to see, that kind of action. Yes, it's a constitutional amendment bill. The president, has sent bills to the National Assembly, and those bills have passed. Why is this going to be different? It's going to be different because we're dealing with about 50% of the country's population. The First Lady was also vocal when she was in the Senate. And so let's not think that this is a new issue. This issue has been there. And what women are saying, what men are also saying, and what young women are saying, that we are in a historic moment, right? And as a matter of legacy, the president, the 10th National Assembly have an opportunity to pass the reserve seats bill, but then the governors also have a role to play in ensuring that at least 2/3, because even if the National Assembly passes that bill, you need 2/3 of the states. You need 24 states. So you need 24 governors. And I think that any progressive governor in Nigeria today who cares about our inclusion, we should have all the 36 governors, actually all the 36 governors and 36 state house of assemblies actually voting for this bill.
All right, we'll take another breather here and see this message, and we'll return and continue with this conversation.
I'm inviting you to join the Side by Side Niger campaign.
At Side by Side Niger, we are asking for just one thing: fair representation of men and women in government through elective and appointive positions.
Why do we need more women in parliament?
Why do we need more women in government?
Only 4 out of 109 senators are women. Only 16 out of 360 House of Representatives are women. In the history of Nigeria, there has never been a female governor. Only 7 out of 36 deputy governors are women. In 14 states, women affairs matters are being headed by men.
But guess what? Women are half the population of Nigeria.
Women also make up to 47.5% of voters. More women should be part of making laws and policies that impact their lives.
Join the movement.
You can bet the discussion was going on behind the scenes here, but that's what it should be. But let's go back to Honorable Rukayat Shitu. I can't resist asking you this. A lot of times I say the political parties always make it extremely difficult for women, and more so young women, to be part of it, to be included in it. They do all kinds of things. They schedule meetings in the small hours of the morning. They drag on for hours, and they do things, a lot of things behind the scenes. Did you have to go through all that yourself? How did you cope?
You see, firstly, I don't advocate for sympathy in a regard like this, because as a woman, I believe me saying I love politics, I'm passionate about governance, I should be ready to do whatever men are doing there. So me neglecting the fact that sometimes we might have meeting in the heat of the night, maybe early morning, these are part of what it entails, and it must be in our head that these are part of the processes if really we are very, very passionate about this thing. So I don't advocate for sympathy, being a woman, so I don't need to be there, so you need to consider me or this. So we have to put in all we have together, just like all men do in that space. We need to also emulate that as a woman.
All right. And what about extending it further? What about certain cultural factors which they say are skewed against women and perhaps family? You had the support of your family, I suppose, but did some, distant relation come to you and say, oh, why do you want to get involved in all of this? Why don't you just finish up your schooling nice and, and stay home? Did you get that kind of advice?
Sure. There will definitely be advice like that. These are part of societal expectation and maybe misconception about women being in the political space. And at the time when I was vying during the pre-election time, somebody have to come against me then that I wasn't married. Like I was still single then. I'm not married at that time. So at that time I engaged a first lady. She sat me down and she educated me. She educates me on so many instances, on so many responses that I can give to such people. So these are part of the misconception people go around as a woman. They will tell you are a young person, you're supposed to be this, you're supposed to be doing this, you don't need to be in this position. It is to you as a person that you are very passionate about this. It is for you to convince them to some certain extent that you can actually do it. And a lot of people are the young women are doing very well in this space. These are people who are worthy of emulation. So we need to correct that stereotype that people are having, especially for young women. They believe that sometimes a young woman might not have the capacity or even how to manage the older generation. And the importance of intergenerational cooperation is very, very essential here, because while the older generation have to transfer knowledge to us, there are still some innovation, even from young women, as a young woman, that you also have to bring on board. So we have to put hands together on the table and get the result at the end of the day.
All right. Well, how well do you think this advocacy is pushing on, like what she's just said now? A lot of misconceptions about young people, women, particularly in politics, and how well do you think attitudes are beginning to change?
I would say that attitudes are changing gradually, and I think as more young women attain prominence in politics and in public service, it would also help to address whatever misconceptions people might have. The advocacy has been on for quite a while. It's been 30 years since the Beijing conference, talking about quite a number of issues that impact women, and part of it was enhancing women's representation and leadership across the world, really. And since that time, we've seen an uptick, so to speak, in the representation of women in leadership in Nigeria as well. And for young women specifically, as I mentioned earlier, as at 2013, 2014, when the APC was formed, I can only make reference to the APC because that's a party that I belong to. It was quite rare to find young women actually being actively involved in the party's processes. But now there is absolutely nothing that could happen within the party's youth wing without young women being adequately represented.
Now that you speak of your party, let me just take it a little bit further. Shouldn't this party that should be setting the tone for others be at the stage where we'd stop seeing things like woman leader and begin to see women vie for chairmanship? What's wrong with a woman being the chairman of APC?
So firstly, I would say that I am not satisfied or pleased with the level of women's representation in political party leadership, whatever party it is. And you will find that many of them have constitutions that talk about quotas for women and all of that they never really feel. And then, because eventually when the leadership is constituted, it's different interests nominating different people, and everybody throws gender and other similar considerations out of the window. That said, I understand that the position of the national women leader is one that is tokenistic on the surface. However, it is an office that can still be used to impact change and to make things happen. It's like the position of, say, a Minister for Women Affairs or a Commissioner for Women Affairs. It looks and sounds, it could look and sound odd depending on what you think about why should we have an office dedicated solely to women. However, women's experiences within the political space or in life generally are quite different from those of our male counterparts. And I say that as somebody who has worked on young women's political mobilization for about 10 years now. So we definitely want increased representation. The party recently had the Deputy National Women Leader included in the NWC as well. It is a good step, but it's not all that we need. And then policies so far have also not translated to increased representation for women when it comes to actually getting the ticket of the party. If you waive a nomination fee, it does not actually guarantee that women will win primaries. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done at that level. So
it takes me back to your earlier comments about the parties thinking women are unelectable. In fact, why shouldn't the parties? We haven't seen women being secretaries, national secretaries of the parties, national chairman, vice chairman, national vice chairman. It goes back to what you said earlier.
Exactly, because the parties believe that women don't have a place in leadership. Because the only way to demonstrate that you believe in women leadership is to intentionally create not just the spaces, but give them the opportunity to at least contest. What you see is a criminalization of aspiration in most of the political parties. If a woman dares, and the whole concept of even daring, it's antithetical to democratic practice. Because as long as you're a member of this democratic community, you have a right to vie. And so the fact that a woman decides to run for a certain office, and she's told, no, you can't run for this particular office because it is meant for men, I think is the greatest disservice and the most unfortunate development within our polity. And this is why parties are not taking this particular issue serious. Look at most of the parties. You look at when INEC hosts its quarterly meetings with parties, they are all men, chairmen, secretaries, men, and then you wonder how diverse, can we be? It's so unfortunate that you have political parties.
Treasurer.
In fact, in some parties, even the women leader position is taken by a man. And that's unfortunate. And we need to change that. And it begins from one, the parties understanding that democracy is about diversity, is about inclusion. There's this notion that power can only be managed, and the only people who have bet rights to power is men. And all of this comes from a lot of cultural practices. We need to dislodge that thinking and appreciate the role that women play when it comes to political leadership. The second point is a point I made earlier, that we need some special temporary measures. And these are practical things parties can do. You know, if you have a situation where you can introduce things like the parity principle, where for a particular position, it shouldn't be manned or led by two individuals of the same gender. That's what happens in other parts of the world. That way, if you have a chairman, the deputy should be a woman. If the chair is a man, the deputy should be a man. That way you create this parity principle. That's something parties can do. The other thing parties can also do is to say, I have not seen a party in Nigeria today who has said, you know, we are going into an election, and a general election, for instance, and say, okay, if we've got this percentage of candidates, perhaps, let's say 30% of the candidates that we would field and nominate to the National Assembly or State House of Assemblies should be dominated by women. And this is the whole essence of proportional representation. Because the more you maintain this electoral design of first past the post, which is winner takes all, you're going to have a situation where you make it difficult for women. When you look at other countries that were referenced in the jingle, whether it's Rwanda or Co., it was about proportional representation. So this reserve seats bill, it's another form of proportional representation, even though it is not proportional, because you are creating seats so women can be part of the decision-making process, not because you want to fulfill a democratic ideal. I think it's beyond that. We need to recognize that it's actually a development issue, in addition to the fact that it's a human rights issue. Right. That the quality of governance can improve if we have women who have the competence, who have the character and the capacity to govern.
If I get you, this shouldn't be about fulfilling all righteousness.
No, it shouldn't.
Right.
It shouldn't.
Okay, let's go back to Honorable Rukayat Shitu. Now the bill is on and advocacy is all over to get it passed so that we can have this reserved seats and help bring in more women into the legislature and get them. In Kwara, how do you see the response to this in Kwara State?
You see, Kwara has a case study when it's involved women generally in governance or in politics. We would say Kwara as we are already practicing these in Kwara, because even looking at the cabinet of the governor, we have like 50-50. And we recently concluded the local government election, and where we have the chairman as a man, we have the deputy as a woman. And where we have a woman as a chairman, we have the deputy as a man. So we already have this in Kwara State. And this is what I'm saying, that if every governor, like whatever they are doing at the national level, boils down to the state, and if every state is doing in their capacity to promote women inclusion in their various states, I believe this is what will transcend to the National Assembly, and this is what will help even the advocacy at the National Assembly. In Kwara State, in the entire North Central region of the country, I think Kwara has the highest number of female legislators at the Kwara State, at the State Assembly. So this is to tell you that in Kwara, we are already doing it differently, though we are still asking for more, we are still advocating for more. But I would tell you categorically that we are far ahead from other states.
Well, you're senior special assistant to the president, but that other part of you is still very much alive and well.
Yes, sir.
How are you driving this to ensure that across the country, from the sub-nationals, there are no dissenting voices?
So in my personal capacity, as I mentioned earlier, I do quite a lot to mentor the young women who are interested in political participation. Young women's inclusion has actually always been a personal cause for me, and women's enhanced inclusion as well. When it comes to advocacy, obviously because I now work in government, I'm not able to be maybe lead from the front lines. I can join the protests, I can join the marches. Well, I can join the marches, but most of the work that we do now is to advocate from within. So I would want to just let Samson know that in as much as we've had a very healthy debate here, I'm committing to ensuring that the concerns shared and the suggestions made will be shared with my superiors in the appropriate quarters. So personally, and then we have quite a number of advocates as well. I'm very familiar with this process actually. When it fell through at the last assembly, the same attempt to secure special seats, many of us were disheartened because we'd actually looked forward to having this happen. There were quite a number of, there was a healthy debate at the time as well with people speaking for and against, but I think we also need to invest a lot more in sensitizing our people, because many people feel very strongly averse the moment you mention anything that has to do with gender equity or parity or anything like that. They feel very strongly averse to it, and there's a need to engage the people as much as we can. I do a lot of that as well in my personal capacity, and we also do quite a lot with trying to get more young women specifically into positions where they can actually influence governance.
And sometimes it'll be up against religious bias as well.
Yes, I've actually had people ask me how I managed to be so active despite being so Muslim.
Right.
So yeah.
You know, and that perhaps is the same thing I'd put to Honorable Rukayat. You know, you know what the religious biases are. You know, how do you get through it? Just like Risola has just described.
You know, being a Muslim and being a young Muslim woman in the political space, I don't think it is something that calls for this misconception that people has already attached to it. Yes. Because looking back, during the era of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we have the likes of Khadija and we have the likes of Aisha. These are wives of the prophets. So, and during that time, these are people that hold some certain key position in Mecca and Medina then. So as a woman, you don't need to use, you don't need to just align with all this new innovation, because these are just new innovation, new misconception from people. We bind it to culture, the cultural factor. Yeah. So we don't have to stick to that. We need to fall back to the era when the Prophet brought Islam, and what are the people, what are the women during that time done. So already the Prophet, his wives, they did so well. Khadija is a very, very notable woman. Even Aisha is a very, very notable woman. So these are people that anytime as someone condemning what I'm doing or citing an example like a woman, being a Muslim woman, you just need to be inside, you need to be somewhere that people will not see you. I give examples of all these people in the past and what they have done. And that time, the Prophet was alive that time, and was there any issue or was there any condemnation from him then? No. So why will you sit down somewhere and condemn what I'm doing? It's about understanding to me. Once I understood what I'm doing very well, so I don't have any issue with whatever anybody is saying, because they are accountable for their own opinion, and I am also accountable for what I know.
Right. Well, Samson, Yaga has been a very strong voice on the matters of electoral process in this country. And I guess, listening to you, I know you feel just about the same way with the pursuit of these this special seats, reserved seats given to women, elective positions. But again, from our discussion, it's not just about that. The parties, the whole process, and it has to be part of all of this.
I think three things. I think the women have made their case about the essence of retooling our legal framework to create the space, because you need the law. I think we just need to recognize that the current legal architecture for our political governance process tilts more towards men. We just need to acknowledge that.
Yes.
And the women have made that case, and men have also made that case. The second thing is the fact that the debate isn't whether women have what it takes. They've also demonstrated that they have what it takes to hold leadership. I think this is about tilting the balance of power. And if we want to advance as a country, it is important to ensure that you have both men and women working together. I think the National Assembly has a huge task. And the one way to prove to the world and Nigerians, most especially whom they are accountable to, is to pass this legislation. That way they demonstrate that they are very committed, to gender inclusion once they pass this legislation. The other point is the president also has a role, to play. Rukayat, who is in Kwara, her governor is an icon when it comes to women participation. He is the chairman of the Nigerian Governors Forum. She needs to talk to her governor so that when the National Assembly passes this bill, at least, if not 24 of them that we need to pass any constitutional amendment bill, at least 30 governors, would approve of this. But I don't want the situation where we have a political process that is so hostile, to women. And when people have this conversation, they say, oh no, women are not ready for leadership, women are not electable. But Rukayat won elections. She is electable. There are 4 senators in the Senate. They are also electable. There are about 11 of them in the House of Reps. They are also electable. These are women. But if you hear their stories, a lot of them went through harrowing experiences. And these are the kinds of things that we need to change, both formal and informal rules. But I also would say in conclusion that there are men who are so committed and passionate to this struggle. Yes. And women need to identify those men, and these he for she's need to be more vocal and not wait for women to speak, because when men speak, sadly, they listen more and they are more respected. So if more men are vocal about women inclusion, maybe it will help in winning other men over.
Well, one aspect I'd like us to consider is the huge financial involvement in all of this. And I don't know, it's also about how we run our politics. You do hear people say, oh, I spent hundreds of millions. And if we go back and think how many women are so financially empowered, and why should our politics entail so much money?
I'm going to push back on that, quite frankly. When you think about, there are wealthy women that men cannot stand in Nigeria. And it's not every man that has won election that has all the financial capital or the fiscal might to execute his election. One thing that stands to a large extent men out is the ability to build networks and networks of support to mobilize resources. Women are beginning to do that. Right? And we need to encourage more of that. Yes, there are successful women in every aspect of our national life.
Certainly.
And so these women need to understand that they need to put their money also in politics, also working closely with men. But yes, structurally, you can say that women are also financially disadvantaged because the economics, right, clearly disproportionately affect women, because there's a structural issue. So when you think about access to opportunity, who gets access to opportunity first? Is it a man or a woman? It will always be a man. So the ground is not leveled. So what we need to do is to see how we make the ground level. And that's why you talk about equity, to create that space where everyone, regardless of the sort of disadvantage that each other have, that there's a place that is created for everyone to be able to aspire to political leadership.
Okay, your final word on this.
Well, I would like to essentially just appeal to our people, everyone, to do more within their capacity as individuals in their communities, within their spheres of influence, to support credible and qualified women who aspire to public leadership.
All right. And for Honorable Rukayat Shitu, your final comments before we move on?
I would say, as a young woman, what we need the most is our network support. Just like Mr. Sampson has said, when it comes to financing, or when you're trying to contest for an election, there are so many men out there that do not have the full resources, and here they are occupying the position. We just have to build together all our network support and strategize the way we are going to do it and achieve the goal. So whatever issue, you are going to face challenges in the way, a very, very hectic one, but we must be determined and focus on the end result.
All right, so thank you so very much for coming on this program. Honorable Rukayat Muturai Oshitu, Chair, House Committee on Information, Sports, Youth and Tourism, Kwara State House of Assembly. Thank you for being here. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you very much for having me.
All right, and then Samson Itodo, Executive Director, Yaga Africa. It's always a pleasure to have you join this conversation.
Always a delight.
Thank you very much. And Nsola Abiola, Senior Special Assistant to the President on Citizenship and Leadership. Thanks for being here.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. All right. Still ahead, the rumble in some state houses of assembly. We'll be talking about that next.